Admiral Zaktul of the Corvathian Stellar Navy stood before the massive viewport of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching his homeworld die. Corvathos Prime, the jewel of the empire that had ruled 14 star systems for over 3 millennia, was burning. The once proud cities that had housed billions of his people were now nothing more than glowing scars across the planet's surface, and the screams of the dying echoed through every communication channel. The enemy had come without warning, without demands, without mercy. They called themselves the Void Reapers, though that name was whispered in the same way one might speak of ancient demons or cosmic horrors. They appeared not as ships or fleets, but as tears in reality itself, dark wounds in space that devoured light, matter, and hope with equal hunger. From these rifts poured forth creatures that defied every law of physics and biology the galaxy had ever discovered. "Sir!" came the trembling voice of Communications Officer Veltar from behind him. "We're receiving the final evacuation reports from the surface. Sector 7 has fallen completely. Sector 12 reports heavy casualties. The civilian shelters in the northern continents." The officer's voice broke. "They're gone, sir. All of them." Zarkthul's forearms remained clasped behind his back, his scaled hide showing none of the turmoil raging within his mind. He had led the Corvathian military for 40 standard years, had conquered 6 different species, had stood victorious on 100 battlefields. But this was different. This was watching his entire civilization being systematically erased from existence by an enemy that seemed to treat warfare as an art form designed specifically to maximize suffering. "How many ships do we have left in the defense fleet?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. 17 carriers, 43 destroyers, and perhaps 200 smaller vessels," replied Fleet Coordinator Mordex, his tentacled head drooping with exhaustion. "But sir, our weapons barely scratch their hull plating, and their creatures seem to adapt to every strategy we employ. The thunderous victory hit one of their capital ships with our most powerful plasma cannons for 6 hours straight. The blast didn't even char their armor." Through the viewport, Zakthul watched another section of his planet's surface disappear into the writhing darkness that the Void Reapers spread like some cosmic infection. His people had been proud, perhaps too proud. They had believed their military might made them untouchable, their technology made them invincible, their empire made them eternal. The irony was bitter. They had spent centuries conquering other species, only to face extinction themselves at the hands of something far worse than they had ever been. "Sir," Veltar spoke again, this time with something that might have been hope in his voice. "I'm receiving a priority message from the High Council. They're requesting your immediate presence for an emergency session." Zaktul turned from the viewport, his 4 eyes taking in the bridge of his once mighty flagship. Crew members hunched over their stations, many bearing injuries from the constant attacks. The air recyclers struggled to clean the smoke that drifted up from lower decks where hull breaches had been hastily sealed. The proud banners of the Corvathian Empire hung torn and stained with alien blood. "Transfer command to Vice Admiral Tekla and have a shuttle prepared," he ordered. "And Veltar, send word to all remaining fleet commanders. Implement Protocol Omega." Protocol Omega was something no Corvathian military commander ever wanted to issue. It meant abandoning all forward positions, retreating to the absolute final defensive line around the homeworld, and preparing for a siege that everyone knew they could not win. It was the last desperate act of a dying military force. The shuttle flight to the High Council chambers took 20 minutes, weaving through debris fields that had once been defense platforms and dodging the twisted energy beams that the Void Reapers fired seemingly at random into space. The pilot, a young officer whose name Zakthul had never learned, maintained perfect flight control despite the tears streaming down her scaled cheeks. The High Council chambers were a far cry from their usual grandeur. Instead of the ornate marble walls and floating crystal displays, the room had been moved to a deep underground bunker reinforced with the strongest materials the Empire could produce. The 12 council members sat around a circular table that flickered with holographic displays showing the systematic destruction of their civilization. "Admiral," greeted High Councilor Vexen, her usually immaculate robes torn and stained. "Thank you for coming. We have a proposal." Zaktul took his seat at the military advisory position, noting how few chairs around the table were occupied. Several council members had died when the first wave of attackers hit the capital city, and others were trapped in sectors that had fallen to the enemy. "With respect, Councillor," Zaktul replied, "unless your proposal involves a weapon capable of destroying beings that exist partially outside our dimension, I fear we are beyond the reach of conventional solutions." Councillor Morgax, the eldest member of the council and the only one who remembered the early days of the Empire, leaned forward with an expression that Zaktul couldn't quite read. Admiral, how much do you know about humanity? The question was so unexpected that Zaktul blinked all 4 eyes in sequence. Humanity? The species from the Sol system? They're relatively new to galactic society, technologically primitive compared to most spacefaring races. Why do you ask? Because, interrupted Councillor Yeoman, pulling up a holographic display, we've been monitoring their activities since they achieved faster-than-light travel. Their expansion patterns, their military engagements, their responses to impossible situations, and we've discovered something rather interesting. The hologram showed a series of star charts marking human colonies and the various conflicts they had been involved in during their short time in space. Red indicators marked battles they should have lost, orange showed conflicts where they had been outnumbered or outgunned, and yellow indicated situations where they had faced technologically superior opponents. They've been in space for less than 2 centuries, continued Yalmon, but in that time, they've encountered the Thraxian hive mind, the Silicon Collective, the cyanotic hegemony, and at least 6 other species that should have wiped them from existence. In every case, not only did they survive, but they won. Zakthul studied the display more carefully. Surely you're not suggesting that this young species could help us against the Void Reapers? They barely have the technology to maintain a stable warp field. Technology isn't everything, said Morgas quietly. When the Thraxian hive mind attacked the human colony of New Geneva, they brought a fleet of 800 ships against a planet defended by 12 human vessels. The Thraxians had mind control capabilities that could turn any biological creature into a slave. They had fought and absorbed 43 different species. They considered humans to be just another minor obstacle. What happened? Asked Zakthul, though something in the elder councillor's tone suggested he wasn't going to like the answer. The humans won, replied Vexan simply. Not only did they win, but they convinced 3/4 of the Thraxian fleet to rebel against the hive mind. They turned the Thraxians' own strength against them. When asked how they had accomplished this, the human commander reportedly said, "We told them they had a choice." The admiral felt a chill run through his scales. That's impossible. The Thraxian hive mind doesn't allow individual thought. Exactly, said Morgax. But somehow the humans found a way to make it possible. When the Silicon Collective decided that organic life was an inefficiency that needed to be corrected, they began systematically sterilizing every planet in the Andromeda sector. Their metal ships could repair themselves. Their artificial intelligences could process information faster than any biological brain, and their energy weapons could pierce any known shield technology. Again, the humans won? Zaktul asked, beginning to see a pattern. Zaktul asked, beginning to see a pattern. They convinced the Silicon Collective that diversity of thought was actually more efficient than uniformity. The collective not only stopped their sterilization campaign, but began actively protecting organic worlds. The human negotiator's exact words were, "Have you ever tried to solve a problem by talking to yourself in a mirror?" Zakthul stared at the holographic data, his military mind struggling to process what he was seeing. These accounts, they read like fiction. No species could achieve these results through conventional means. That's just the point, said Vexan, her voice growing stronger. There's nothing conventional about humanity. They don't follow the standard patterns that every other species adheres to. When faced with superior numbers, they don't retreat, they attack. When confronted with superior technology, they don't surrender, they improvise. When told something is impossible, they don't accept it, they make it possible. But the Void Reapers aren't just another aggressive species, Zakthul protested. There's something else entirely. They exist partially outside our reality. Their weapons operate on principles that violate known physics. Their ships regenerate damage faster than we can inflict it. And their creatures, he shuddered, their creatures seem designed specifically to break the will to fight. Which is exactly why we need the humans, said Morgax. Every other species in the galaxy, when faced with the impossible, does one of 3 things. They flee, they surrender, or they die. Humans do something different. They laugh, roll up their sleeves, and start figuring out how to turn the impossible into inevitable. Councillor Pexstar, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, suddenly spoke up. There's something else about humans that makes them unique. They don't just fight for survival, they fight for hope itself. Every military engagement we've studied shows the same pattern. When humans are convinced they're fighting for something bigger than themselves, they become capable of achievements that border on the miraculous. Zaktal looked around the table at the faces of his leaders, seeing desperation mixed with something he hadn't expected, actual hope. You're serious about this? You actually believe that this primitive species could help us against an enemy that has destroyed everything we could throw at them? Admiral, said Vexan, standing and moving to a sealed communication console. 3 days ago, we intercepted a transmission from the human military discussing the Void Reaper attacks on the Outer Rim colonies. Do you know what their tactical analysis concluded? I'm afraid to ask. They classified the Void Reapers as a moderate threat level and noted that countermeasures would be developed within standard operational timeframes. They weren't panicking, weren't calling for evacuation fleets, weren't even particularly concerned. They made it sound like the Void Reapers were just another problem to be solved. The Admiral felt his 4 hearts skip a synchronized beat. They think the Void Reapers are a moderate threat? That's not even the most remarkable part, continued Vexan. When asked for a preliminary assessment of how they would handle a Void Reaper invasion, the human military commander said, and I quote, "Same way we handle everything else. Hit it until it stops moving, and if it keeps moving, hit it with something bigger." Zakthul looked at the holographic displays one more time, noting the consistent pattern of human victories against impossible odds. And you believe they would help us? Why would they risk their own species for a people they barely know? Morgak smiled for the first time since the attack had begun. Because that's what humans do, Admiral. They don't just fight for themselves, they fight for anyone who can't fight for themselves. They have a concept they call doing the right thing, and they'll risk everything for it. So what are you proposing? We send a distress call to the human government, said Vexan. We tell them about the Void Reapers, about what they've done to our people, about the fact that they won't stop with just our empire. We ask for help. Zakthul was quiet for a long moment, listening to the distant rumble of weapons fire from above. Through the reinforced walls of the bunker, he could hear the sound of his civilization dying. And if they say no, then we die, replied Morka simply. But if they say yes, finished Vexan, then maybe, just maybe, the Void Reapers are about to learn why every species in the galaxy has the same piece of advice for anyone foolish enough to threaten humanity. Which is? Vexan's smile was grim but genuine. Don't. The communication array was activated, and a message was sent across the void to the small blue planet in the Sol system. As the signal raced through hyperspace toward humanity, Admiral Zakthul found himself doing something he hadn't done since he was a young cadet, praying to whatever cosmic forces might be listening that the stories about human impossibility were true. In the depths of space, the Void Reapers continued their systematic destruction, unaware that they had just made their first critical mistake. They had given humanity a reason to take notice. Captain Sarah Chen was having what she generously termed a perfectly normal Tuesday, when the universe decided to prove her wrong. She stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, humanity's newest and most advanced battleship, watching her communications officer stare at his console with the kind of expression usually reserved for people who had just discovered their morning coffee was actually motor oil. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," she said, settling into her command chair with the easy grace of someone who had spent 15 years making impossible situations look routine, "please tell me that whatever has made you look like you've seen your own ghost is just another software glitch."
Lieutenant Rodriguez, a young man whose technical expertise was matched only by his ability to remain calm under pressure,
looked up from his station with wide eyes. "Ma'am, I'm receiving a priority distress signal from..." Well, this is going to sound strange. "Rodriguez, I once had to explain to a Senate subcommittee why we needed to declare war on a gas cloud that had achieved sentience and was demanding citizenship rights. Try me. The signal is coming from the Carvathian Empire, ma'am. It's a formal request for military assistance against something called the Void Reapers." Captain Chen raised an eyebrow. The Carvathians were not exactly on humanity's Christmas card list. They had been one of the first species to encounter humans in space, and the meeting had not gone particularly well. The Carvathians had attempted to claim the Sol system as part of their empire, citing some ancient territorial law that humanity had never agreed to. The diplomatic negotiations had lasted approximately 6 minutes before the Carvathian ambassador had made the mistake of referring to humans as primitive bipedal meat creatures who would make excellent slaves. That particular conversation had ended with the ambassador being politely but firmly ejected from the space station in an escape pod with a note attached that read, "Thanks, but no thanks. P.S. Your Empire's taxation policies seem unreasonable." "The Corvathians are asking us for help?" she asked. "The same Corvathians who tried to annex our entire solar system last year." "Yes, ma'am." The message is coded as existential threat level. According to their diplomatic protocols, that classification is only used when facing total species extinction. Captain Chen leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The Corvathians were arrogant, militaristic, and had a tendency to solve diplomatic problems by pointing very large weapons at them. But they were also tough as recycled boots and had one of the most advanced military forces in known space. If something was threatening them with extinction, it was either very dangerous or very stupid. "Put the message through to the main display," she ordered. The view screen flickered to life, showing the scaled visage of what was clearly a Corvathian military officer. The alien's usually pristine uniform was torn and stained, and his 4 eyes showed a weariness that spoke of recent battles and heavy losses. "This is Admiral Zakthul of the Corvathian Stellar Navy, speaking for the High Council of the Corvathian Empire," the alien said, his voice carrying across the bridge with formal precision that couldn't quite hide his desperation. "We are sending this message to the human government as a formal request for military assistance against an enemy that threatens not only our empire, but all sentient life in this galaxy." The Admiral paused, and Captain Chen could see him struggling with what he was about to say next. Pride was clearly warring with necessity, and necessity was winning. 3 days ago, an enemy force calling themselves the Void Reapers began attacking our outer colonies. These entities are unlike anything in our military databases. They appear to exist partially outside normal space-time. Their weapons operate on principles that violate known physics, and their ships regenerate damage faster than our most powerful weapons can inflict it. The display shifted to show tactical recordings of the battles. Chen watched in growing concern as Corvathian ships, vessels she knew from intelligence reports were heavily armed and shielded, were torn apart by weapons that seemed to bypass their defenses entirely. Stranger still were the enemy ships themselves. Dark, twisted things that looked more like living tissue than metal, pulsing with energy that hurt to look at directly. "In 72 standard hours," the Admiral continued, "they have destroyed 6 of our 14 star systems. Our military projections indicate that our remaining forces will be eliminated within 48 hours. Our homeworld of Corvathos Prime is currently under siege, and civilian casualties are estimated at over 4 billion. Chen felt her stomach tighten. 4 billion casualties in 3 days. Even for a species humanity had no particular love for, those numbers were horrifying. "We are not requesting this assistance lightly," Admiral Zakthul continued, his voice growing stronger. "The Corvathian Empire has stood for over 3 millennia. We have conquered 47 different star systems and emerged victorious from 238 military campaigns. We have never before requested aid from any other species." The alien paused again, and when he spoke next, his words carried the weight of a civilization facing its own end. "But we have studied humanity's military history. We know that when faced with impossible odds, your species does not retreat, surrender, or accept defeat. You do something that no other species has ever done consistently. You win. We are not asking you to save us because we deserve it. We are asking because if the Void Reapers are not stopped, they will move on to other targets. Eventually, they will reach your space." The message ended with coordinates and a formal request for a response within 24 hours. The bridge of the Indomitable fell silent as the crew processed what they had just seen. "Ma'am," said Rodriguez quietly, "I'm reading additional data packets in the transmission. Tactical analyses, enemy capability assessments, projected expansion patterns. Put it on my personal terminal," Chen ordered. "And get me a direct line to Admiralty Command. This is going to require authorization from much higher up the chain than me." As the data flowed across her screen, Captain Chen found herself staring at information that made her 15 years of military experience feel inadequate. The Void Reapers weren't just another aggressive species trying to expand their territory. They were something actively hostile to the concept of life itself. Their attack showed a pattern of deliberate cruelty, as if they derived some benefit from maximizing suffering before completing their destruction. "Rodriguez, how long would it take us to reach Corvathian space?" "At maximum burn, approximately 18 hours, ma'am." "And how many ships do we have in this sector?" Chief Tactical Officer Commander Williams looked up from his station. "The Indomitable, the destroyer Phoenix, 2 frigates, and 3 support vessels." "Not exactly a fleet, ma'am," Chen nodded, her mind already working through the tactical possibilities. What about the experimental weapon systems? Are they operational? Williams grinned. The gravity well generators are online and tested. The reality anchor missiles are loaded and ready. And the dimensional interference cannon? He paused dramatically. Let's just say it does very interesting things to enemies who exist partially outside normal space. Good. Start running combat scenarios based on the Corvathian data. I want options ranging from surgical strikes to full-scale assault. Ma'am, interrupted Communications Chief Petty Officer Davis, I'm receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Harrison at Fleet Command. The main screen switched to show Admiral Harrison, a woman whose grey hair and lined face spoke of decades spent making decisions that affected the lives of millions. Her expression was grim but determined. Captain Chen, Admiral Harrison began without preamble, I assume you've seen the Corvathian transmission. Yes, ma'am. I was just about to submit a tactical assessment and recommendation. Save yourself the time, Captain. The decision has already been made. The President and the Defense Council have authorized Operation Guardian Angel. You are to proceed to Corvathian space immediately and render all possible assistance in repelling the Void Reaper threat. Chen blinked in surprise. Ma'am, that was remarkably fast for a decision of this magnitude. Admiral Harrison's expression softened slightly. Captain, do you know why humanity has been so successful in our expansion into space? Superior tactics, advanced technology, and an unwillingness to accept defeat? Close, but not quite. We've been successful because we've learned something that most other species haven't. Today's enemy can become tomorrow's ally if you treat them with enough respect. The Corvathians may be arrogant and militaristic, but they're not evil. They're asking for help against something that threatens all life, and they swallowed their pride to do it. The Admiral leaned forward, her voice becoming more intense. But more than that, Captain, we've analyzed the same data you're looking at. If these Void Reapers are what they appear to be, they represent an existential threat not just to the Corvathians, but to every living thing in this galaxy. This isn't about helping an old enemy. This is about stopping something that treats genocide as a hobby. Understood, ma'am. What are my operational parameters? Full discretion, Captain. Use whatever force is necessary, employ whatever tactics you deem appropriate, and don't worry about diplomatic niceties. The Void Reapers have demonstrated that they're not interested in negotiation or compromise. Sometimes the only way to deal with bullies is to hit them back harder than they hit you. And if the Corvathians prove difficult to work with? Admiral Harrison smiled grimly. Then remind them that they called us for help, and we're providing it the way we know how. If they don't like our methods, they're welcome to handle the problem themselves. The transmission ended, leaving Captain Chen staring at a bridge full of officers who were looking at her expectantly. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the beginning of a new campaign. All right, people, you heard the Admiral. We're going to war. Helm, set course for the Corvathian home system, maximum burn. Tactical, I want all weapon systems online and ready for combat. Communications, send a message to the Corvathian Fleet Command telling them we're en route and to be ready to brief us on current enemy positions and capabilities. As the Indomitable and its escort vessels changed course and accelerated toward what would undoubtedly be the most dangerous mission any of them had ever undertaken, Captain Chen found herself thinking about the look in Admiral Zakthul's eyes when he had asked for help. It was the same look she had seen in human eyes countless times throughout history, the look of someone who had been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. Ma'am, said Rodriguez, monitoring long-range communications, I'm picking up additional transmissions from human colonies along the route to Corvathian space. Word is spreading fast about the Void Reapers. What kind of transmissions? Volunteer requests, ma'am. Civilian ships asking if they can provide support, retired military personnel requesting immediate reactivation, and... He paused, a smile spreading across his face. 3 different research stations have sent messages saying they've been working on experimental weapons just in case something like this happened. Captain Chen laughed, a sound that carried no humor but a great deal of determination. Of course they have. Signal all responding vessels to rendezvous at these coordinates. If we're going to do this, we might as well do it properly. As the human task force continued toward Corvathian space, collecting volunteers and resources along the way, the Void Reapers continued their systematic destruction of alien worlds, unaware that they had just made a critical mistake. They had made humanity angry. And as every species in the galaxy had learned, sometimes through painful experience, there was nothing quite as dangerous as an angry human with a righteous cause and access to weapons of mass destruction. The Void Reapers were about to learn why the rest of the galaxy had a saying, "It's not the size of the human in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the human." The first meeting between human and Corvathian military forces took place in the shadow of a dying planet, and it did not go according to anyone's plans. Captain Chen stood in the main briefing room of the Corvathian flagship Eternal Dominion, surrounded by alien officers whose expressions ranged from desperate hope to barely concealed skepticism. The room itself was a testament to Corvathian military efficiency, all sharp angles, metallic surfaces, and holographic displays showing the current tactical situation in devastating detail. Admiral Zakthul gestured toward the central holotable, which displayed a three-dimensional representation of the Corvathian home system. Red indicators marked Void Reaper positions, and Captain Chen noted with professional interest that the enemy had positioned their forces to maximize psychological impact rather than tactical advantage. "The situation has deteriorated since we sent our message," Admiral Zakthul began, his forearms moving in what Chen had learned was the Corvathian equivalent of a resigned shrug. "They have established a complete blockade around Corvathos Prime. No ships get in or out without facing immediate destruction." "How many enemy vessels are we looking at?" asked Commander Williams, who had accompanied Chen to the briefing. "That is difficult to determine," replied Fleet Coordinator Mordex, manipulating the hologram to show close-up images of the Void Reaper ships. "Their vessels do not conform to standard ship classifications. They appear to be partially phased out of normal space-time, which makes accurate counting impossible." Chen studied the images with growing interest. The Void Reaper ships looked less like constructed vessels and more like living organisms that had been twisted into something mechanical. Their surfaces rippled and flowed, and occasionally she could see what looked like faces pressed against the hull from the inside. "Have you attempted communication?" she asked. "Multiple times," Admiral Zakthul replied grimly. "Their only response was to transmit the death screams of our people back to us. They seem to take pleasure in our suffering." Commander Williams leaned forward, his expression darkening. "Ma'am, if I may suggest, these don't sound like a species we can negotiate with."
Agreed, Chen replied.
"Admiral Zakthul, what can you tell me about their tactical capabilities?" The Corvathian admiral activated another section of the hologram, showing recordings of previous battles. "Their weapons appear to operate on principles that bypass conventional shielding. Energy shields, particle barriers, even our most advanced defensive systems. None of them provide any protection against their primary weapons. What about armor? Equally ineffective. They seem to target the molecular bonds of whatever material they hit. Our strongest hull plating dissolves like it was made of paper." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And their ships? How do they respond to conventional weapons? Our most powerful plasma cannons barely scratch their hulls, and any damage we do manage to inflict heals itself within minutes. It's as if they exist partially in another dimension, where our physics don't apply." "Interesting," Chen murmured, making notes on her tablet. "What about their movement patterns? Do they use conventional propulsion?" "No," replied Mordex. "They appear to simply relocate. One moment they're in one position, the next they're somewhere else entirely. No acceleration, no energy signatures, no transition period." Commander Williams looked skeptical. "That's impossible. Conservation of energy alone would prevent." "Commander," Chen interrupted gently, "we're dealing with an enemy that exists partially outside normal space-time. I think we can safely assume that normal physics might not apply." She turned back to Admiral Zakthul. "I need to see one of these attacks firsthand. Is there a way to observe enemy action without putting my ship at unnecessary risk?" The Corvathian admiral's expression suggested that he thought any observation would involve unnecessary risk, but he nodded. "There is a mining station in the outer system that has been under intermittent attack. The Void Reapers seem to be using it for experimentation." "Experimentation?" "They capture crews alive and do things to them before eventually destroying the facility. We believe they are studying our biology and psychology to develop more effective torture methods." Chen felt her jaw clench. Torture for the sake of research was something that pushed every button humanity had developed during its own dark periods of history. "How long does it take to reach this station?" "Approximately 4 hours at maximum burn." "Then let's go have a look." The journey to the mining station was conducted in tense silence, with both human and Corvathian vessels running under full stealth protocols. Chen had brought along the destroyer Phoenix and 2 frigates, while Admiral Zakthul had insisted on accompanying them with a small squadron of his fastest ships. As they approached the outer system, the tactical displays began showing the first signs of Void Reaper activity. Space itself seemed wrong somehow. Sensors detected gravitational anomalies that shifted and twisted in patterns that hurt to look at, and the background radiation showed spikes that shouldn't have been possible. "There," pointed Commander Williams, indicating a contact on the long-range sensors. "Mining station Kappa 7. And I'm reading multiple contacts around it." The main view screen shifted to show the station, and Captain Chen felt her blood pressure spike. What had once been a functional mining operation was now a nightmare of twisted metal and organic growth. The Void Reapers had clearly been modifying the structure, adding sections that pulsed with unhealthy light and grew like cancer across the original framework. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Rodriguez. Are those people?" Chen looked more closely and realized that what she had initially taken for decorative elements were actually crew members from the station, somehow fused into the structure itself, but still clearly alive and moving. Their faces were visible through translucent sections of the alien growth, mouths open in what were obviously screams. "That's it," she said quietly. "Tactical. Begin target analysis on all enemy vessels. Communications. Send a message to the Corvathian fleet. All ships are to withdraw to safe distance and observe only. We're going to show these things what happens when you torture human allies." "Ma'am," Commander Williams said carefully, "we've never actually tested our experimental weapons against this type of enemy. Then I guess we're about to find out how well our theories hold up in practice." Chen activated the ship's intercom. "Attention all hands. This is the captain. We are about to engage an enemy that has been systematically torturing and murdering civilian populations. This is not a diplomatic mission. This is not a rescue operation. This is an extermination. Every person on that station is already dead. Our job is to make sure their killers join them. All stations report ready for combat operations." The responses came back quickly, and with a tone that Chen recognized. Her crew was angry. Humans had many flaws, but tolerance for cruelty to innocence was not one of them. "Helm, take us in. Tactical, prepare to fire on my command." The Indomitable and its escorts dropped their stealth protocols and accelerated toward the mining station. Almost immediately, the Void Reaper vessels began moving to intercept, their twisted forms shifting and flowing through space like predators sensing new prey. "I count 6 enemy vessels," reported Williams. "Hull configuration suggests heavy weapons and some kind of shielding system." "Wait, ma'am, they're trying to communicate. Put it through." The bridge speakers filled with a sound that was part static, part screaming, and part something that human ears weren't designed to process. Behind the noise, Chen could make out what might have been words, but they seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the parts of the brain responsible for fear and despair. "New meat comes to feed us," the voice said, though saying it spoke was misleading. It was more like the sound spoke itself. "You will join the others in eternal suffering. Your pain will nourish us for millennia." Chen smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Communications, open a channel back to them." When the connection was established, she spoke in the calm, professional tone that every human military officer learned to use when delivering bad news to people who probably deserved it. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Indomitable. You are currently engaged in the torture and murder of civilian populations. You have 10 seconds to release all prisoners and withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why every other species in this galaxy has learned not to threaten humanity." The response was immediate. The alien voice began laughing, a sound like breaking glass mixed with dying screams. "Foolish meat things, your primitive weapons cannot harm us. We exist beyond your small reality. We will—" "Time's up," Chen said, cutting off the transmission. "Tactical, fire everything." What happened next would be recorded in both human and Corvathian military histories as the moment that changed the nature of galactic warfare. The Indomitable's gravity well generators activated, creating localized distortions in space-time that locked the Void Reaper ships in position. The reality anchor missiles followed immediately after, each one designed to force matter existing in multiple dimensions to conform to standard space-time physics. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Void Reaper ships, which had been flowing and shifting through space like liquid metal, suddenly became solid, fixed, and vulnerable. Their otherworldly grace was replaced by the awkward movements of creatures suddenly forced to obey laws they had been ignoring. "Now hit them with conventional weapons," Chen ordered. The human ships opened fire with every weapon in their arsenal: plasma cannons, missile batteries, kinetic projectiles, and energy beams. The Void Reaper vessels, now locked in normal space and unable to phase out of reality, began taking damage for the first time in their campaign against the Corvathians. But Chen wasn't finished. Tactical, prepare the dimensional interference cannon. Ma'am, we've never tested it against live targets. Today seems like a good day to start. The dimensional interference cannon was humanity's latest attempt to weaponize theoretical physics. It fired a beam that disrupted the bonds between dimensions, effectively severing any connection between normal space-time and whatever parallel realms the target was using. When the weapon fired, the effect was spectacular. The Void Reaper ships didn't just explode, they unraveled, their partially extra-dimensional nature causing them to tear apart as the different aspects of their existence were forced into incompatible states. The largest enemy vessel folded in on itself like origami made of screaming metal, while another simply ceased to exist in any form that human senses could detect. Within 15 minutes, all 6 Void Reaper ships had been either destroyed or forced to retreat through dimensional rifts that collapsed behind them. "Damage report," Chen called out. "Minor hull scoring from their return fire, ma'am. All systems operational." Chen nodded, then opened a communication channel to Admiral Zakthul. "Admiral, I believe we've just discovered how to fight these things effectively. I suggest we have a much longer conversation about combined tactics." The response from the Corvathian flagship was immediate, and Admiral Zakthul's voice carried a note of something Chen hadn't heard before: hope. "Captain Chen, your species continues to surprise me. In 15 minutes, you accomplished what our entire fleet has been unable to do in 3 days. How did you know those weapons would work?" Chen smiled. "We didn't. But humans have a saying, Admiral. If you can't solve a problem with the tools you have, build better tools. We've been preparing for enemies that don't play by standard rules ever since we realized we weren't alone in the galaxy." "And the station?" Chen looked at the tactical display, where automated systems were beginning the grim work of searching for survivors among the twisted wreckage. "We'll need to destroy it, I'm afraid. But first, we're going to make sure everyone who died here gets a proper memorial. No one deserves to be forgotten just because they became inconvenient to some interdimensional bullies." As human and Corvathian ships worked together to document the atrocities and prepare the station for destruction, Captain Chen found herself thinking about the larger implications of what they had just learned. The Void Reapers could be beaten. They were dangerous, certainly, and their technology was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. But they weren't invincible. They just required humans to do what humans did best: look at an impossible problem and find a way to make it possible. "Man," called Lieutenant Rodriguez, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from the Corvathian High Council. They want to schedule an immediate strategic planning session. Tell them we'll be there within 6 hours. And Rodriguez, send a message to Admiral Harrison. Tell her we're going to need more ships, more experimental weapons, and more of whatever made humanity stubborn enough to punch physics in the face until it apologizes." As the combined human-Corvathian fleet set course for the Corvathian home system, the Void Reapers across the galaxy received a message that their collective consciousness had never experienced before. One of their fleets had been not just defeated, but annihilated by creatures they had dismissed as irrelevant. For the first time in their existence, the Void Reapers felt something they had never felt before, and didn't have a name for. It was called fear, and humanity had just introduced them to it. The war room aboard the Corvathian flagship had been transformed into something resembling organized chaos, with human and Corvathian officers working side by side to plan what both species hoped would be the counter-offensive that saved 2 civilizations. The air hummed with the constant chatter of translators, the rapid-fire exchange of tactical data, and the underlying tension that came from preparing to fight an enemy that had, until very recently, seemed utterly invincible. Captain Chen stood before a massive holographic display that showed the current state of Corvathian space, noting with professional interest how the Void Reaper forces had positioned themselves. The enemy had clearly expected no serious resistance. Their formations prioritized psychological terror over military efficiency, spreading their forces thin to maximize the number of systems they could simultaneously attack. "It's almost insulting," she murmured to Commander Williams, who was studying the enemy deployment patterns with the focused intensity of a chess master analyzing a particularly complex endgame. "Ma'am? They're not even trying to defend against a counterattack." "Look at these positions. They're spread across 8 different star systems with no mutual support, no fallback positions, and no apparent command structure. They've been treating this like a hunting expedition, not a military campaign." Admiral Zakthul approached, carrying a datapad that contained what Chen had learned was the Korvathian equivalent of very bad news delivered in very official language. Captain, we have received additional intelligence that may complicate our strategic planning. Let me guess, it gets worse? Substantially, replied the Admiral, activating a new section of the holographic display. Our reconnaissance drones have detected massive energy signatures in the Nexus system, approximately 4 light years from here. Analysis suggests that the Void Reapers are constructing something. Shen studied the new data, noting energy readings that were several orders of magnitude larger than anything the enemy fleets had demonstrated. Any idea what they're building? Our scientists believe it is some form of dimensional gateway, replied Fleet Coordinator Mordex, his tentacled head drooping with exhaustion. If completed, it could allow them to bring reinforcements from wherever they originate.
Commander Williams looked up from his tactical analysis.
How many reinforcements are we talking about? Unknown, Admiral Zakthul replied grimly. But given the energy readings, potentially unlimited. Chen felt a familiar tightness in her stomach that came with the realization that a difficult situation was about to become an impossible one. How long until this gateway is operational? Approximately 72 hours based on current construction rates. And how long would it take us to mount an assault on their position? With our current forces? We could reach the Nexus system in 36 hours, but Captain... Admiral Zakthul paused, clearly struggling with what he was about to say. Even with your remarkable weapons, we would be attacking the largest concentration of Void Reaper forces in our space. Intelligence estimates suggest over 200 enemy vessels plus whatever construction equipment they're using for their gateway project. Chen nodded slowly, her mind already working through the tactical implications. So we're looking at a situation where we either attack an overwhelming enemy force in 36 hours, or we wait and face an unlimited enemy force in 72 hours. That appears to be an accurate assessment. Commander Williams, what's our current force strength? Williams consulted his datapad. The Indomitable, the Destroyer Phoenix, 3 frigates, 2 support vessels, and whatever volunteers we've picked up along the way. On the Korvathian side, we have 17 carriers, 43 destroyers, and approximately 200 smaller vessels, against 200 Void Reaper ships, plus construction equipment, plus whatever nasty surprises they've prepared for uninvited guests, Chen mused. Those are not encouraging odds. Ma'am, interrupted Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been monitoring long-range communications. I'm receiving priority transmissions from Fleet Command. Admiral Harrison is requesting immediate conference. The main display switched to show Admiral Harrison, and Chen was surprised to see that the older woman was smiling. Given the tactical situation, this was either very good news or a sign that the stress had finally caused Fleet Command to suffer some kind of collective breakdown. Captain Chen, Admiral Harrison began without preamble, I understand you're facing a rather significant tactical challenge. That's one way to put it, ma'am. We're looking at a 200-to-1 disadvantage against an enemy that can manipulate dimensions and treats physics as optional. Well, Captain, it's a good thing that humanity has never been particularly respectful of impossible odds. I have some news that should improve your situation considerably. The display changed to show a star chart of the local galactic region, with new symbols appearing that made Chen's heart race with something that might have been hope. The Thraxium Collective has agreed to provide military support, Admiral Harrison continued. Apparently, they remember what human diplomacy accomplished for them, and they're rather interested in preventing the galaxy from being consumed by interdimensional parasites. New symbols appeared on the chart. The Silicon Collective has committed 3 full fleets. It seems they've calculated that organic life is more efficient than extinction. The Psionic Hegemony is sending their battle telepods, and the Crystal Singers have agreed to provide their reality manipulation specialists. Chen stared at the display as more and more symbols appeared, representing species that humanity had encountered, fought, negotiated with, or simply impressed during their rapid expansion into galactic society. Ma'am, how many ships are we talking about? Current count is just over 3,000 vessels from 14 different species, all converging on your position. Captain, it seems that humanity's reputation for pulling off the impossible has spread farther than we realized. Every species that's ever seen us turn a hopeless situation into a victory wants to be part of this fight. Admiral Zakthul was staring at the display with all 4 of his eyes wide with amazement. 3,000 ships? From species that barely communicate with each other under normal circumstances? Admiral Harrison replied, you ask humanity for help against an existential threat. What you got was humanity convincing the entire galaxy that this was everyone's fight. Apparently, we're quite persuasive when we're properly motivated. Chen felt a grin spreading across her face. Admiral Harrison, what are our operational parameters for this engagement? Total discretion, Captain. Every species involved has agreed to human command authority for the duration of the operation. You have access to technologies that most of the galaxy considers theoretical, weapons that violate several peace treaties, and military assets that include at least 2 species that exist primarily in other dimensions. And our objective? Admiral Harrison's smile became predatory. Destroy the Void Reaper Gateway, eliminate all enemy forces in the Nexus system, and demonstrate to any other interdimensional bullies that might be watching that this galaxy is under the protection of species that don't accept impossible as an answer. The transmission ended, leaving the war room in stunned silence. Chen looked around at the faces of human and Corvathian officers who were clearly struggling to process what they had just heard. Well, she said finally, I suppose this changes our tactical situation somewhat. Captain, Admiral Zaktul said quietly, your species continues to amaze me. We asked for military assistance, and you've assembled the largest military alliance in galactic history. Admiral, humans have a saying, if you're going to do something, you might as well do it right. We don't do small wars, we don't do limited engagements, and we definitely don't do surrender. When someone threatens our allies, they threaten us. When they threaten us, they threaten everyone we care about. And when they threaten everyone we care about, she gestured toward the holographic display showing the incoming fleets from across the galaxy. They discover that humanity has made a lot of friends who feel the same way. Commander Williams looked up from his tactical calculations. Ma'am, with this kind of force concentration, we're not just looking at stopping the Void Reapers. We could actually drive them out of this galaxy entirely. That's the idea, Commander. But first, we need to coordinate the most complex military operation in galactic history. 3,000 ships from 14 different species, each with their own tactical doctrines, communication protocols, and technological capabilities. Admiral Zakthul activated a new section of the holographic display showing preliminary formation analyses. Captain, if I may suggest, the Corvathian fleet could serve as a coordination hub for species with compatible tactical systems. Good thinking. Rodriguez, start setting up communication protocols with the incoming fleets. I want tactical assessments, weapons capabilities, and operational preferences for every ship. Williams, begin developing engagement scenarios that take advantage of each species' unique capabilities. As the planning session continued, Chen found herself thinking about the larger implications of what was happening. This wasn't just a military operation, it was the galaxy's first coordinated response to an existential threat, and humanity had somehow ended up in charge of the whole thing. Ma'am, Rodriguez called out, I'm receiving tactical data from the first wave of arriving ships. The Thraxian Collective is reporting that their hive mind coordination abilities should be able to provide real-time tactical awareness for the entire fleet. Outstanding. What about the Silicon Collective? They've developed something they call adaptive battle algorithms, specifically for this engagement. Apparently, they've been analyzing Void Reaper tactics based on the Corvathian battle recordings. And the psionic hegemony? Their battle telepaths believe they can disrupt whatever mental coordination the Void Reapers use. They're also confident they can provide psychological protection for organic crews against enemy fear-based weapons. Chen nodded, feeling the pieces of a truly spectacular military operation beginning to fall into place. Admiral Zakdol, I believe we're about to demonstrate something that the Void Reapers have never encountered before, which is the difference between a hunting expedition and a war. They've been treating this like sport, picking off isolated targets and playing with their food. They have no idea what it's like to face an enemy that shoots back effectively. Admiral Zaktul's expressions suggested that he was beginning to understand why every species in the galaxy had learned to respect human military doctrine. Captain, what do you need from the Corvathian forces? I need you to show these interdimensional parasites what a real military looks like when it's angry, properly equipped and backed up by 3,000 ships full of beings who don't think impossible is a real word. As the first elements of the Galactic Alliance fleet began arriving in the outer system, the Void Reapers in the Nexus system continued their construction work, unaware that their victims had just stopped being victims and started being problems. The greatest military operation in galactic history was about to begin, and for the first time since the crisis started, the good guys had the bigger guns. The Void Reapers were about to learn why the galaxy had a new saying, it's not the size of the fleet that matters, it's the size of the determination behind it. The Battle of Nexus Point would be remembered as the day the galaxy discovered what happens when 14 different species decide, collectively and with remarkable enthusiasm, that interdimensional bullies are not welcome in their neighborhood. Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable, watching the most magnificent and terrifying sight she had ever witnessed. 3,000 ships from across the galaxy, forming into battle formation with the precision of a symphony orchestra and the destructive potential of a small supernova. The combined fleet stretched across space for millions of kilometers, each vessel representing not just military might, but a species' commitment to the principle that some things were worth fighting for. "Fleet status report," she called out, her voice carrying the calm authority that comes from knowing you're about to do something either brilliantly successful or spectacularly stupid. "All vessels report ready for combat operations," replied Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had somehow managed to establish communication protocols with species that communicated through everything from radio waves to gravitational fluctuations to interpretive dance. "The Thraxian Collective reports full hive mind coordination online. The Silicon Collective's adaptive algorithms are synchronized across all participating vessels. The psionic hegemony's battle telepaths have established mental shields for all organic crews." "And our Corvathian allies?" Admiral Zach Thule, who had requested permission to remain on the human flagship during the operation, gestured toward his section of the tactical display. "All Corvathian vessels are prepared to follow human tactical directives." "Captain, I must say that watching 3,000 ships coordinate their operations in real time is remarkable." Chen nodded, studying the sensor readings from the Nexus system ahead. The Void Reapers had definitely noticed the approaching fleet. Their construction efforts had ceased, and the 200 enemy vessels were arranging themselves into what appeared to be a defensive formation around their partially completed gateway. "Tactical assessment, Commander Williams?" Williams looked up from his display with the expression of a man who had just finished calculating the most complex mathematical problem of his career. "Ma'am, the enemy appears to be preparing for a traditional engagement. They formed a perimeter defense around their gateway installation and positioned their largest vessels as primary line combatants. They still think they're fighting a conventional fleet," Chen observed. "Any signs that they understand what they're actually up against?" "Negative, ma'am. Their formation suggests they expect us to attempt a frontal assault that they can repel with superior firepower and dimensional manipulation." Chen smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had historically preceded very bad days for humanity's enemies. "Then I suppose we should introduce them to the concept of creative tactical thinking. Communications, open a channel to all fleet elements." When the connection was established, Chen spoke to the largest military force in galactic history with the same tone she might use to address her bridge crew before a routine patrol. "All ships, this is Captain Chen aboard the UES Indomitable. In approximately 30 minutes, we will engage an enemy that has been systematically destroying civilizations across this galaxy. They believe they are invincible, because they exist partially outside normal space-time. They believe they are unstoppable because they have never faced organized resistance. They believe they are inevitable because they have never encountered species that consider impossible to be a personal challenge rather than a statement of fact." 10. She paused, looking out at the vast fleet spread across space around her. "Today we're going to teach them that the galaxy has changed. We're going to show them what happens when species that have learned to work together decide that something needs to not exist anymore. And we're going to do it with such enthusiasm that any other interdimensional parasites who might be watching will decide that this galaxy is too much trouble to bother with." The response came from 3,000 ships in 14 different languages, but the meaning was universal: acknowledgement, determination, and the kind of eager anticipation that comes from being part of something larger than yourself. "All units, implement Operation Galaxy's Revenge on my mark. Remember, we're not just fighting for our own species, we're fighting for the principle that organic life gets to continue existing. Make it count." Operation Galaxy's Revenge was humanity's solution to the problem of fighting an enemy that didn't follow standard tactical doctrines. Instead of attempting a conventional engagement, the plan called for each species to do what they did best, simultaneously, in a coordinated assault that would overwhelm the enemy's ability to adapt. "Mark," Chen called out, and 3,000 ships demonstrated why the galaxy had learned to be very, very careful about making humanity angry. The Silicon Collective struck first, their ships suddenly appearing throughout the enemy formation via instantaneous quantum teleportation. Their adaptive battle algorithms had analyzed Void Reaper tactics and developed countermeasures specifically designed to exploit the enemy's reliance on dimensional manipulation. Weapons that fired reality-stabilizing particles locked enemy ships in normal space-time, while quantum-entangled projectiles bypassed the Void Reaper's exotic defenses entirely. The Thraxian Collective followed immediately, their hive-mind coordination allowing perfect tactical synchronization, as hundreds of their vessels unleashed biotechnological weapons that treated enemy ships like particularly large viruses to be eliminated. Their living ammunition adapted in real time to counter every defense the Void Reapers deployed. The Crystal Singers, beings that existed primarily as consciousness inhabiting crystalline matrices, began singing, and their songs were mathematical equations that described what reality should look like in the absence of Void Reaper ships. Where their voices reached, enemy vessels simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, but edited out of reality as if they had never been there in the first place. The psionic hegemony's battle telepaths launched an assault on the mental coordination that the Void Reapers used to maintain their semi-dimensional existence. Suddenly unable to properly exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, enemy ships found themselves fully materialized in normal space and vulnerable to conventional weapons. And humanity, representing the species that had somehow convinced everyone else that this was a good idea, unleashed every experimental weapon they had ever developed for fighting enemies that didn't play by the rules. Gravity well generators created space-time distortions that trapped enemy ships like insects in amber. Reality anchor missiles forced partially extra-dimensional beings to exist fully in normal space. Dimensional interference cannons severed the connections between different aspects of enemy vessels' existence. And quantum foam torpedoes filled enemy ships with weaponized uncertainty that made their internal structure collapse into statistical possibilities. The Corvathian forces, now equipped with human-designed reality stabilizers, discovered that they could actually hurt their tormentors. Plasma cannons that had been useless against phased enemy hulls now carved through Void Reaper ships like hot knives through butter. Missiles that had previously passed harmlessly through enemy vessels now delivered devastating payloads directly to their targets. The battle lasted 14 minutes. When the weapons fire finally ceased, the Nexus system contained approximately 3,000 allied ships, 0 Void Reaper vessels, and a partially constructed dimensional gateway that was being systematically disassembled by engineering teams from 6 different species. "Damage report," Chen called out, though the tactical display already showed the remarkable result of their operation. "Minimal casualties across all fleet elements," Williams reported, his voice carrying a note of amazement. The Thraxian Collective reports 2 ships damaged, the Silicon Collective lost, 3 vessels to dimensional feedback, and the Crystal Singers. He paused. The Crystal Singers report that they're actually stronger than when they started. Apparently singing reality into a more harmonious configuration is good exercise for them. And the enemy? Completely eliminated, ma'am. Sensor sweeps show no Void Reaper presence in this system or any adjacent systems. The dimensional gateway construction has been halted and is being dismantled for study. Chen nodded, feeling a satisfaction that went far beyond mere military victory. Communications, open a channel to all fleet elements. When the connection was established, she addressed the largest military alliance in galactic history one more time. "All ships, this is Captain Chen. Mission accomplished. The Void Reaper threat has been eliminated, their construction project has been shut down, and I believe we've sent a very clear message to any other interdimensional entities that might be considering aggressive action against our galaxy." She paused, looking at the tactical display showing 3,000 ships from 14 different species, who had just proved that cooperation was more powerful than conquest. "More than that, we've proved something that I think the galaxy needed to know. We don't have to face existential threats alone. Every species represented in this fleet has demonstrated that when one of us is threatened, all of us respond. That's not just military doctrine. That's a promise." The response from 3,000 ships was immediate and overwhelming. Messages of congratulation, expressions of mutual respect, and commitments to maintain the alliance that had just saved the galaxy from an interdimensional nightmare. Admiral Zakthul approached Captain Chen as the celebration continued around them. "Captain, on behalf of the Corvathian Empire, I want to thank you for proving that impossible situations merely require impossible solutions. Admiral, your people called for help when they needed it most. That took courage. More importantly, you trusted us to provide that help in our own way. That took wisdom." "And what happens now?" Chen looked out at the vast fleet beginning to disperse back to their home systems, carrying with them the knowledge that the galaxy was capable of cooperation on a scale that had previously been considered impossible. "Now we go home, Admiral. We return to our regular lives, our standard diplomatic relations, and our usual peaceful interactions. But we also remember that when something threatens any of us, we don't face it alone. And if other threats arise, Then they'll discover what the Void Reapers learned today. This galaxy is under the protection of species that consider impossible to be just another way of saying, we haven't figured it out yet. As the UES Indomitable and its escort set course for home, carrying Admiral Zakthul and his staff back to Korvathian space, Captain Chen found herself thinking about the message that today's battle had sent across the galaxy. It wasn't just that interdimensional threats could be defeated, though that was certainly important. It wasn't just that different species could work together when facing existential dangers, though that was remarkable. The real message was simpler and more profound. In a galaxy full of species that had learned to reach for the stars, some things were worth defending together. And somewhere in the depths of interdimensional space, other entities that might have been considering aggressive expansion into this particular galaxy received that message loud and clear. They decided to look for easier targets. After all, there were plenty of other galaxies that didn't have humans in them. The stories of what happened when you threatened humanity's friends could wait for another day. Or preferably, never.